The judge said the answers were not, quote, motivated by improper bias against Peterson, so a new trial is unnecessary. Peterson is serving a life sentence without the possibility.
The camera opens on a man in a baseball cap, standing in a neat suburban driveway in Modesto, California. It is December 2002. His pregnant wife is missing. His voice is even, almost flat, as he looks into the news camera and says he just wants her home. No tears, no visible panic, just a practiced calm. Behind him, the house is quiet. Viewers don't know it yet, but Laci Peterson and her unborn son are already dead, dumped in the cold grey water of San Francisco Bay by the man begging for their safe return on live television. His name is Scott Lee Peterson. To neighbors, he is the quiet, polite husband with the pretty wife and the baby on the way. He plays golf, works in fertilizer sales, smiles for family photos. Online, Laci's posts present the image of a glowing young couple on the brink of parenthood, but beneath the surface is debt, infidelity, and a man who sees his pregnant wife not as a partner, but as a problem to solve. One wife, one unborn son, one fishing trip that will become one of the most notorious pregnancy-associated murders in American history. Peterson is born on October 24, 1972 in San Diego, California. He grows up in a blended middle-class family, sharing a home with siblings, sports gear, and golf clubs. Teachers remember a polite, focused student. Friends recall a soft-spoken guy, competitive on the course but not explosive. There is no obvious childhood horror, no single trauma that neatly explains what he will later do. The pattern is more subtle. A fixation on image, a tendency to hide rather than confront, charm used as lubricant to slide past conflict. At California Polytechnic State University, he meets Laci Rocha, a vivacious, driven young woman. They marry in 1997, move to Modesto, and begin building a life that looks stable from the outside. But as financial strain builds and Laci's pregnancy progresses, Scott's double life takes shape. Attentive husband at home, secret lover with Amber Frey in Fresno, telling her he is a widower even before his wife disappears. What emerges from friends' later testimony is a portrait of a man with compartmentalized relationships, different versions of Scott for different audiences, all carefully managed to avoid collision. On the morning of December 24, 2002, Peterson claims he goes alone to a Berkeley marina to fish for sturgeon. Laci, 8 months pregnant with their son, Connor, is supposedly at home walking the dog and preparing for Christmas dinner. By evening, she is missing. The timeline he offers is thin and full of gaps. When Laci's family calls police, suspicion quietly settles on him almost immediately. Officially, there is one confirmed victim, Laci, and one unborn child, Connor. Unofficially, there is something else. The murder of an entire imagined future. Birthdays, school photos, a life never lived. Prosecutors later argue that Peterson killed Laci in the Modesto home, loaded her body into his truck, and dumped her in the bay from his small fishing boat. He has researched tides. He has bought the boat in secret. He calls his mistress on the drive back, playing the role of lonely single man facing the holidays alone. The most disturbing element is not a frenzied outburst, but the cold logistical planning. A man willing to kill his pregnant wife not in a moment of passion, but as a calculated exit strategy. Even more chilling, friends and family report no arguments, no violence, no tension visible between them in the days before. Just Scott's quiet determination to free himself from family responsibilities without bearing the social and financial costs of divorce. The investigation tightens quickly. Detectives notice his flat affect, his lack of urgency, his willingness to sell Laci's car and inquire about selling the house even as searchers are still combing fields and canals. The real fracture comes when Amber Frey steps up to a podium and reveals that Scott told her weeks before Laci vanished that his wife had died, and this would be his first Christmas without her. Police wire Amber's phone. On recorded calls, he lies easily, even as candlelight vigils for his missing wife air on the news. In April 2003, bodies wash ashore near his reported fishing location. First a tiny, decomposed fetus, later identified as Connor, then the torso of an adult woman with a maternity pants label still attached. Within days, officers arrest Peterson in La Jolla. His hair is lightened. His car holds large amounts of cash, camping gear, and multiple phones. He tells officers he's going golfing. The attempted escape is the final piece for investigators. Not the panicked flight of an innocent man, but the calculated disappearing act of someone who has been planning his next move all along. When confronted with evidence, Peterson's responses reveal a man more concerned with his image than with the death of his wife and son. "I wasn't running," he insists to detectives, even as his dyed hair and Mexican pesos tell a different story. In 2004, his trial opens in Redwood City under intense media scrutiny. Prosecutors present a circumstantial but layered case, motive in the form of an affair and financial stress, evidence of planning, incriminating behavior after Laci's disappearance. The defense points to the lack of direct forensic proof and suggests unknown kidnappers took Laci and killed her later. In the gallery, Laci's mother, Sharon Rocha, listens as the jury hears about the baby who would never be born. After convicting Scott of first-degree murder for Laci and second-degree murder for Connor, the jury recommends death. Rocha later tells the court, Laci and Connor did not deserve to die, framing the crime not just as murder, but as the annihilation of a family. The sentiment echoes through the courtroom. 2 murders in one act, 2 futures erased by a man who couldn't simply walk away. What makes the case particularly haunting is how ordinary it seems on the surface. A young husband, a pretty wife, a baby on the way. The kind of family that appears in Christmas card photos, not crime scene documentation. And yet, beneath this veneer of normalcy, lurked a husband who saw his pregnant wife as an obstacle to overcome, not a partner to cherish. Peterson spends years on death row at San Quentin, becoming a symbol in debates over media bias and capital punishment. In 2020, California's Supreme Court overturns his death sentence due to issues with jury selection, but upholds the conviction. He is resentenced to life without parole and transferred to a different state prison. Legal battles continue, with innocence advocates arguing flaws in the investigation, but as of 2025, he remains convicted of murdering his pregnant wife and unborn child. Throughout his incarceration, Peterson maintains his innocence, a stance that further enrages the families of his victims. Prison reports describe him as a model inmate who has adjusted well to life behind bars, a fact that some see as further evidence of his sociopathic tendencies, his ability to adapt and perform in any environment. The case continues to fascinate criminologists and psychologists who see in Peterson not the frenzied rage of a typical domestic homicide, but the cold calculation of a man for whom other people exist, primarily as props in his own life story. Was Scott Peterson a man pushed past breaking point by money and marital strain, or was he always someone for whom other people existed only as props in his preferred life script? The answer may be both. What is clear is that when the life he had no longer suited him, he chose not to change himself, but to erase his family. And as horrifying as that is, he is far from the only killer who viewed pregnancy not as sacred, but as expendable. Perhaps most disturbing is not the rarity of his crime, but its reflection of a darker truth. For some, the heavily pregnant body represents not life to be protected, but an inconvenience to be removed. And in that calculation, we see not just the failure of one man, but the failure of a society to truly value the lives of expectant mothers and their unborn children. The next predator doesn't just erase a pregnant woman, she tries to steal the baby inside her. December 16th, 2004, Skidmore, Missouri. A small town known for quiet streets and dog breeding, not for what is about to happen. 23-year-old Bobby Jo Stinnett is 8 months pregnant and expecting a visitor, a woman from the online rat terrier community who wants to buy a puppy. The visitor's name, at least on the message boards, is Darlene Fisher. Later that day, Bobby Jo's mother will walk into her daughter's home and find her on the floor, strangled, her abdomen brutally opened, the baby gone. It will look, one officer says, like her stomach had exploded. The woman behind the alias is Lisa Marie Montgomery. To her community in Kansas, she is a friendly wife and mother with a soft voice and a chaotic life, the kind of woman who might show up with a new baby and a story about a surprise early labor. To those who later dissect her past, she is also the product of a childhood marked by extreme abuse, sexual assaults by family members, beatings, trafficking by her own mother. As an adult, she lies often and easily. She fakes illnesses. She claims pregnancies that never exist. By late 2004, she is entangled in a custody dispute and under pressure to produce a baby she has told people she is carrying. There is no baby. There is only a lie approaching its expiration date. Montgomery has carefully cultivated an online persona as someone interested in dog breeding, specifically the rat terriers that Bobby Joe raises. The digital relationship between predator and victim begins innocuously enough, with messages about puppies and prices, breeding and bloodlines. It is the perfect cover for a woman looking for access to a heavily pregnant target. Montgomery is born on February 27, 1968, in Topeka, Kansas. Her childhood reads like a case study in how to destroy a human being. Rapes by stepfathers and other men, filmed assaults, beatings, humiliations. Various relatives later testified that Lisa is used as a commodity, not a child. She grows into a teenager who dissociates frequently, escapes into fantasy, and learns that lying is sometimes the only way to survive. In her early 20s and 30s, she has real pregnancies and children, but also phantom ones. At different times, she insists she is pregnant when she is not, sometimes even wearing maternity clothes and preparing nurseries for babies that will never arrive. As legal and financial pressures mount, particularly around custody of her existing children, the fantasy of one more baby becomes her solution. She cannot keep lying forever, so she decides to make the lie real at someone else's expense. Psychiatric evaluations later reveal a woman with brain damage, post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar disorder, temporal lobe epilepsy, multiple personality disorder, and psychosis. She experiences dissociative states where reality blurs, but these same experts note something else. Despite these severe mental health issues, Montgomery is able to meticulously plan and execute a complex crime, suggesting a level of awareness that complicates any simple narrative of insanity. On December 16, 2004, she drives to Skidmore, pretending to be a customer for one of Bobby Joe's puppies. The two women have built a rapport online. Once inside Bobby Joe's small home, Lisa's demeanor shifts. She attacks, strangling Bobby Joe with a rope or cord until she loses consciousness. Then she performs a crude cesarean section with a kitchen knife, cutting into the younger woman's abdomen and removing the barely full-term baby girl. Bobby Joe regains consciousness long enough to attempt to reach a phone, leaving bloody handprints, but cannot survive the injury. Montgomery cleans the newborn as best she can, cuts the umbilical cord, and drives away. That night, she calls her husband and presents the infant as their own, claiming to have gone into sudden labor while Christmas shopping. The forensic evidence later collected from the scene tells a story of determined brutality, blood spatter on walls and furniture, signs of a struggle, and the final desperate crawl toward a telephone that Bobby Joe never reached. Medical examiners would later testify that the extraction of the baby showed some rudimentary anatomical knowledge. Montgomery had researched cesarean sections online and had possibly practiced the procedure mentally before executing it. Most chilling of all, she brought the tools with her: rope, knife, and clean towels to wrap the infant, suggesting a level of premeditation that went beyond a momentary psychotic break. For a few hours, the lie works. Family members coo over the baby. Lisa posts as if she has just given birth, but Skidmore is small, and Bobby Joe's murder is discovered quickly. The image of a young, heavily pregnant dog breeder slaughtered in her own living room sends shockwaves through the community. The FBI is contacted. By cross-referencing online posts, email headers, and IP addresses, investigators hone in on Darlene Fisher and trace her back to Montgomery's home in Melvin, Kansas. Less than a day after the murder, agents knock on Lisa's door and find her sitting on the couch with a tiny newborn in her arms. The speed of the investigation is remarkable, a testament to the digital breadcrumbs Montgomery left behind and the focused determination of investigators working against time to find a newborn who needed immediate medical care. When confronted, Montgomery initially maintains her story, insisting the baby is hers. It is only when faced with the overwhelming evidence of her deception that she begins to crack, her carefully constructed fantasy world collapsing under the weight of reality. The baby is rushed to a hospital. DNA confirms that she is Bobby Joe's daughter. Lisa is arrested and charged in federal court with kidnapping resulting in death, a capital offense. In 2007, at her trial in Kansas City, jurors hear a story that is almost unbearable in its extremes. The prosecution paints her as a calculating killer who planned the abduction meticulously, targeting a specific pregnant woman and faking online friendship to gain access. The defense presents expert after expert, describing a woman shattered by years of sadistic abuse, suffering from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative episodes, and brain damage. The question is not whether she killed Bobby Joe, she did, but whether her mental state should spare her life. The jury decides it should not. One prosecutor calls the killing a grotesque and brutal murder, asking the court to consider the terror Bobby Joe must have felt as she realized her baby was being cut from her body. In the courtroom, Bobby Joe's husband and family sit through weeks of testimony, forced to relive the horror of her final moments. They hear how Montgomery had searched online for information about cesarean sections, how she had created the fake Darlene Fisher persona weeks in advance, and how she had specifically targeted Bobby Joe not just because she was pregnant, but because she lived in an isolated area and would likely be home alone. Montgomery spends more than a decade on federal death row. Her case becomes the focus of campaigns against executing the mentally ill and severely traumatized. In late 2020 and early 2021, last-minute appeals attempt to halt her execution, arguing that her understanding of reality is too compromised for a humane death sentence. They fail. On January 13, 2021, at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, Lisa Montgomery is executed by lethal injection. She is the first woman executed by the U.S. federal government in nearly 70 years. Bobby Joe's daughter, Victoria Joe, survives and grows up with her father, living with the knowledge that her birth was inseparable from her mother's death. The case forces a difficult conversation about the intersection of severe mental illness, extreme childhood trauma, and violent crime. Montgomery's defenders argue that her execution represents a failure of the justice system to account for her profoundly damaged mind and life. Her prosecutors maintain that, regardless of her background, her crime showed planning, awareness, and choice, the hallmarks of criminal responsibility. What remains undisputed is the reality of a young mother strangled in her own home, her child cut from her body by someone she had no reason to fear. Did Lisa Montgomery act out of madness or ruthless calculation? The reality is that she embodies both, a woman shaped by unimaginable cruelty who chose to inflict cruelty on someone else to sustain a fantasy. Her story forces a disturbing question. How much does understanding a killer's suffering change the meaning of what they do? Whatever the answer, the fact remains. A pregnant woman opened her door to sell a puppy, and another woman walked out with her baby and her life. And in that brutal transaction, we see the dark logic that links all these cases, the view of a pregnant body not as a person to be protected, but as a vessel containing something the killer wants by any means necessary. If Montgomery is a relic of early internet forums and rural dog breeding communities, our next case drags this pattern into the age of Instagram and gender reveal parties.
Is facing the death penalty in this trial. She is accused of capital murder and kidnapping and the death of 21-year-old Reagan Hancock and her unborn baby Brexlin.
A phone camera records pink confetti exploding into the air over a backyard in Texas. Friends cheer. A woman smiles, holding her belly, posing as if she is due any day now. Her name is Taylor Renee Parker. Her social media feeds are full of bump photos, ultrasound images, and posts about impending motherhood. But there is a problem. She is not pregnant. There is no baby inside her. As the due date she has invented draws closer, she begins to search for one, inside someone else. Parker is born in the early 1990s and grows up in Texas and Oklahoma. Accounts from those who knew her paint a picture of a charismatic but chronically dishonest woman with a trail of failed relationships, financial problems, and medical complaints. She learns early that sympathy and drama can bring attention, and she leans into both. There are stories of pregnancies that end without documentation, health crises that appear and disappear, and the general sense that much of her life takes place on a stage where facts are flexible. By 2020, she is in a relationship where a baby is expected. She has told her boyfriend and many others that she is pregnant. She posts sonogram pictures, hosts a gender reveal, and accepts gifts. None of it is real. Those close to Parker later describe a woman who has elevated deception to an art form, fake doctor appointments carefully scheduled, sonogram images downloaded from the internet, a belly that grows through strategic padding, not fetal development. She becomes increasingly invested in the pregnancy narrative, spending hours researching fetal development so she can accurately describe her supposed symptoms and experiences to friends and family. The elaborate performance demonstrates not just dishonesty, but a disturbing ability to maintain a complex web of lies across multiple relationships and social contexts. As the fake due date approaches, Parker's fabrication becomes dangerous. The human body doesn't lie. Her belly doesn't match the timeline. Her story starts to fray at the edges. Instead of backing down, she goes deeper. She begins researching medical procedures, watching videos about cesarean sections, and quietly tracking pregnant women in her social circle. One of them is 21-year-old Reagan Simmons Hancock from New Boston, Texas, a young mother already raising a small child, now heavily pregnant with her second daughter, Braxlyn. Parker has been around Reagan's home. She knows her routines. She knows she is close to full term. Digital evidence recovered later shows Parker's systematic stalking of Reagan, studying her social media posts for information about her due date, driving by her home to observe her comings and goings, and even reaching out to mutual acquaintances to gather information about Reagan's pregnancy. The targeting is precise and calculated, the work of a predator selecting the optimal victim for a crime she has been planning for months. What makes this case particularly disturbing is how Parker's digital footprint reveals a mind moving steadily toward violence, watching instructional medical videos about cesarean sections alongside searches about how to fake one's own labor and delivery. On the morning of October 9, 2020, Parker drives to Reagan's house under the pretense of giving her a ride or help. What happens inside that house is pieced together from forensic evidence and medical reports. Reagan is beaten and stabbed repeatedly. One coroner later testifies to more than 100 injuries. Parker then cuts open Reagan's abdomen and removes the unborn baby girl. She leaves Reagan dying on the living room floor, a Christmas tree nearby, while she drives away with the infant. Hours later, state troopers stop Parker's car on a rural road. She tells them she has just given birth on the side of the highway. In the back seat, a newborn struggles to breathe. The level of violence in Reagan's home stuns even experienced investigators. Blood evidence shows a prolonged, desperate struggle, Reagan fighting for her life even as Parker attacks her with multiple weapons. Most disturbing is the fact that the cesarean appears to have been performed while Reagan was still alive, meaning she may have been conscious as Parker cut her baby from her body. The medical examiner notes that the incision shows hesitation marks and multiple attempts, suggesting that Parker struggled with the procedure despite her research. This was not a clean, clinical extraction, but a savage attack on a mother in her own home. At a hospital, medical staff immediately note that something is wrong. Parker's body does not show signs of recent childbirth. There is no blood, no stretching, no physical evidence of labor. Meanwhile, back in New Boston, Reagan's mother discovers her daughter's body and calls 911. crime scene technicians are confronted with a nightmare: a murdered pregnant woman whose uterus has been opened and an unborn child missing. When investigators compare timelines, phone records, and witness statements, the pieces lock into place. Parker's online search history, recovered later, will show chilling queries about how to perform a cesarean at home and how early a fetus can survive outside the womb. They also find searches for how to fake being pregnant, fake a pregnancy bump, and most disturbingly, can you remove a baby from womb yourself? Parker's digital trail becomes one of the key pieces of evidence against her, documenting a mind methodically planning a horrendous crime while simultaneously constructing an elaborate cover story. Phone records place her at Reagan's home at the time of the murder and track her movements afterward. When combined with the physical evidence from the scene and the baby's DNA, they create an overwhelming case. In 2022, Parker goes on trial for capital murder in Bowie County. Prosecutors argue that she slaughtered Reagan to get a baby, describing a months-long deception that culminated in a meticulously planned attack. Present digital evidence, including searches and messages and forensic testimony about the brutality of the crime. The defense raises mental health issues, suggesting that Parker's lies and behavior are rooted in deep psychological disturbance. But the jury sees something else: a woman who chose, step by step, to turn a lie into a homicide. She is convicted and sentenced to death. In 2025, Texas's highest criminal court upholds her death sentence, keeping her on death row. During the trial, Reagan's family describes a loving young mother who was excited about welcoming her second daughter, a woman with real hopes and dreams cut short by someone living in a fantasy. The contrast between Reagan's authentic motherhood and Parker's performance of it becomes one of the most poignant aspects of the case. While Reagan prepared a nursery for a baby she would never meet, Parker was preparing for a birth that would never happen unless she took someone else's child. Now incarcerated, Parker becomes a symbol of the lethal convergence of social media performance, pathological lying, and reproductive obsession. Reagan's stolen baby survives and is raised by her father and extended family, living with a story that began in violence and theft. The question that lingers is brutal. What happens when identity and public image become so intertwined that a person is willing to carve a new reality out of someone else's body? In an era where online personas often diverge from reality, Parker represents an extreme endpoint. Someone whose commitment to maintaining a digital fiction led her to commit an analog horror. The case raises difficult questions about how social media can enable and intensify certain types of pathology, creating feedback loops of validation for dangerous fantasies that, in an earlier era, might have remained private delusions rather than public performances requiring violent fulfillment. Not all killers who target pregnant women want to keep the baby. Some simply want the status of motherhood. Others want to erase evidence of a pregnancy altogether. Our next case goes back to 1987, to a dusty parking lot outside a military hospital in New Mexico, where a different kind of predator is waiting.
In 1987, she kidnapped Cindy Ray, who was pregnant, and drove her to the East Mountains. Peterson murdered her and used a car key to cut her baby from her womb.
It is a blistering July day in Albuquerque. Pregnant women come and go from a prenatal clinic on Kirtland Air Force Base, hands on their backs, appointment slips in hand. Among them is 19-year-old Cindy Ray, 8 months pregnant, leaving an appointment. Watching the comings and goings from a car is Darcy Jo Pierce, a 19-year-old woman who has told her husband and family she is also due to give birth that day. She is not. She is there to find someone who is. Pierce's early life is marked by instability. She grows up in a turbulent environment with family mental health issues and reports of emotional neglect. As a teenager, she struggles with depression, blurred reality, and episodes of pseudocyesis, a condition in which a woman is convinced she is pregnant despite clear medical evidence to the contrary. By her late teens, she is married and living in New Mexico, telling those around her that she is expecting a baby. She gains some weight, wears maternity clothes, and appears emotionally invested in the fantasy. When her supposed due date arrives in July 1987, she has no baby. What she does have is a plan. Medical and psychological records later reveal a young woman caught in a complex web of delusion and deceit. Friends report that Pierce has been pregnant several times before, but that these pregnancies mysteriously disappeared or were mistakes. What makes this case particularly disturbing is the evidence suggesting that at some level, Pierce knew she was not really pregnant, yet remained committed to producing a baby by the date she had announced. The pressure of expectations from her husband, family, and herself created a countdown clock that could only end one way, with someone else's child. According to court records and psychiatric reports, Pierce spends that July day circling the Kirtland Clinic, watching heavily pregnant women. When she spots Cindy Ray, alone and vulnerable, she offers her a ride. The details are sparse but chilling. Pierce drives Cindy to a remote dirt road, binds her, and strangles her until she believes she is dead. Using her car keys, she cuts into Cindy's abdomen and removes the fetus, a baby girl who somehow survives. Pierce then drives to a hospital, claiming she has just given birth on the roadside. She presents the infant as her own. Staff initially treat her as a new mother. The crime scene later discovered by police is horrifying. A young woman left to die in the dirt, her abdomen crudely opened with whatever tools were at hand. What strikes investigators is the primitive nature of the attack. Unlike later cases where perpetrators researched cesarean sections or prepared specialized tools, Pierce seems to have acted with minimal planning. The brutality of the improvised surgery suggests a mind operating in a state of desperate determination, focused solely on acquiring a baby by the deadline she herself had created. It does not take long for the truth to surface. When Cindy's body is found, the crude incision and missing baby make headlines. Investigators quickly connect the timing of Pierce's supposed delivery with Cindy's murder. Medical staff realize that Pierce does not show the expected signs of recent childbirth. Under questioning, her story unravels. The baby is taken into protective custody and later given to Cindy's family. Pierce is arrested and charged with murder, kidnapping, and child abuse. When detectives search her home, they find a nursery fully prepared for a baby, complete with clothes, diapers, and toys. They also discover a calendar with the due date circled, invitations to a baby shower, and multiple congratulatory cards from friends and family. The evidence paints a picture of a young woman so invested in her fantasy pregnancy that backing out became unthinkable, leaving her to see abduction and murder as her only path forward. At trial in 1988, prosecutors describe a calculated, if delusional, hunt for a pregnant victim. The defense argues that Pierce suffers from severe mental illness and pseudopsoriasis, suggesting she was not fully aware of the reality of her actions. The jury finds her guilty but mentally ill of first-degree murder and related charges. She is sentenced to life in prison plus additional years. Over time, her case becomes a touchstone in psychiatric discussions of fetal abduction and the blurred line between delusion and responsibility. Experts in forensic psychiatry point to the Pierce case as one of the earliest documented instances of what would later be recognized as a pattern in fetal abduction cases, a non-pregnant woman creating a pregnancy narrative, setting a due date, and then targeting a pregnant woman as that date approaches. Her defense attorney argued that Pierce truly believed she was pregnant and that her actions stemmed from a psychotic break when confronted with the reality that she was not. The prosecution countered with evidence of planning and calculation, including Pierce's selection of a clinic where pregnant women would be easy to find and identify. Is Darcy Pierce a murderer driven by greed or a psychotic young woman lost in a fantasy of motherhood? The answer is uncomfortable. Her mental illness is real. So is the body of Cindy Ray, left in the dirt so Pierce could arrive at a hospital cradling a baby she did not conceive. When delusion becomes lethal, the damage cannot be undone. As of 2025, Pierce remains incarcerated in New Mexico, having spent over 3 decades behind bars. Cindy's daughter, now in her late 30s, grows up knowing the circumstances of her birth, a trauma that reverberates through generations. The case stands as an early example of a crime that would become disturbingly familiar in the decades to come, raising questions about the complex relationship between psychiatric disorder and criminal responsibility when fantasy spills over into deadly action. In the Pierce case, one pregnant woman dies so another can play mother. In the next, woman's obsession with a baby wipes out nearly an entire family. The apartment in Addison, Illinois, is quiet when police enter on November 16, 1995. Toys are scattered on the floor. A television flickers in the background. In the bedroom, they find 24-year-old Deborah Evans, heavily pregnant, lying in a pool of blood, her abdomen mutilated. 2 of her young children are dead or dying nearby. Another infant is missing. So is the unborn child that was due any day now. Investigators quickly realize they are not dealing with a single homicide, but a largely unprecedented crime, the targeted destruction of a pregnant mother and her children to steal a baby. At the center of this massacre is Jacqueline Annette Williams. To some, she is simply Jackie, a 29-year-old from the Chicago area with a history of fraud, petty crime, and complex relationships. She has told people she is pregnant. She has acquired baby clothes. She has a boyfriend, Fidel Caffey, and a cousin, Laverne Ward, both willing to engage in criminal schemes. Behind the scenes, she is under pressure to produce a baby she has claimed is hers. As with so many of these cases, lies about pregnancy reach a point where reality must be forced into alignment. Court records paint a picture of a household united in criminal purpose. Caffey, described by prosecutors as a cold and calculating killer, is reportedly obsessed with having a son. Ward, the biological father of one of Deborah's children, has a complicated history with her, including allegations of domestic violence. Together, they form a trio bound by deception and escalating desperation. Williams's pregnancy lie is particularly elaborate. She has been pregnant for months, has had baby showers, has discussed names and nursery colors. But like all the killers in these cases, she faces a countdown that cannot be extended indefinitely. Deborah Evans is already a mother when Jacqueline and her accomplices target her. She has 3 children, Samantha, 10, Joshua, 8, and infant Jordan, as well as the near-term fetus she is carrying. Williams knows Deborah, at least peripherally. On November 16th, she and the men enter Deborah's apartment. Evidence later shows that Deborah is stabbed and shot, and that her unborn baby is removed from her body in a makeshift cesarean. Samantha and Joshua are also attacked. Samantha dies from multiple stab wounds, Joshua from a gunshot. Infant Jordan is taken from the scene alive, along with the newborn extracted from Deborah's womb. The crime scene horrifies even veteran detectives. Blood evidence indicates that Deborah was alive when her baby was cut from her body. The wounds on Samantha suggest she tried to defend herself or her mother. Joshua appears to have been executed to eliminate witnesses. The brutality is methodical, not frenzied, each death serving a purpose in the killer's plan. What makes this case stand out among fetal abductions is the sheer scope of the violence. Not just the targeted mother, but her children as well, suggesting a complete dehumanization of the entire family. The brutality continues after the initial attack. Samantha's body is left in the apartment. Joshua is discovered later in a trunk. Jordan, the 1-year-old, is eventually killed and discarded in a trash bin. The stolen newborn, Deborah's baby, later named Elijah, is taken to Williams's home, where she attempts to pass him off as her own child. For days, she coos over him, telling neighbors she has given birth. Police searching for Deborah's missing children, however, quickly narrow their focus. Forensic evidence later reveals that Joshua did not die immediately. After being shot in the apartment, he was placed in the trunk of a car, still alive. He managed to escape when the killer stopped at a motel. Found wandering and injured, he told authorities, "They killed my mom. I think they killed my sister too." He provided key information about the attackers before dying from his wounds. This final act, a dying child identifying his family's killers, becomes one of the most heart-wrenching aspects of the case, representing both the ultimate horror and the crucial break that investigators needed. Investigators pieced together the timeline. The home invasion, the disappearance of the children, the discovery of Jordan's body, and rumors about Williams's sudden baby. When officers arrive at her residence, they find Elijah alive. The forensic links are strong. Blood evidence, witness statements tying Williams, Kathy, and Ward to Deborah's home, and Williams's history of false pregnancy claims. The three are arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and aggravated battery. The evidence trail is complex but damning. Blood matching Deborah's is found in Ward's car. Items from the Evans home are discovered in Williams's possession. Most tellingly, medical examination confirms that Elijah is Deborah's biological child, born just before or during her murder. For prosecutors, the motive is clear. Williams wanted a baby, Kathy wanted a son, and they were willing to slaughter an entire family to get one. Trials in the late 1990s reveal a plot that is chilling not only for its violence, but for its cold logic. Prosecutors argue that Williams wanted a baby, and that eliminating Deborah and her older children was, in her mind, the cleanest way to get one. A prosecutor calls it the ultimate theft, the theft of a child from his mother's womb. Jurors hear about the horror inside the apartment and the dismembered family tree. A mother, 2 children, a baby dumped like trash, and a stolen newborn. Williams is convicted and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Kathy receives the death penalty, later commuted when Illinois abolishes capital punishment. Ward is also sentenced to life. The trials are marked by graphic testimony that leaves jurors visibly shaken. Medical experts describe the crude C-section performed on Deborah. First responders recount finding Samantha's body. Perhaps most devastating is the testimony about Joshua, his escape, his brave identification of the killers, and his ultimate death from injuries that might have been survivable with prompt medical attention. The deliberate targeting of children makes this case stand apart even in the grim catalogue of fetal abductions. Today, Williams remains behind bars. Elijah, the stolen baby who survived, grows up with the knowledge that he was cut from his mother's body and that his survival cost the lives of almost everyone in his immediate family. The Evans murders have been chronicled in true crime books and documentaries, often cited as one of the most extreme examples of fetal abduction and family annihilation in American criminal history. For criminologists, the case represents an intersection of multiple pathologies: Williams's obsession with having a baby, Kathy's apparent willingness to acquire a child through violence, and Ward's participation in the destruction of a family that included his own child. It raises disturbing questions about group dynamics in violent crime, particularly how a primary obsession, Williams's fake pregnancy, can draw others into an escalating spiral of violence and justification. What does it mean when the desire to be a mother becomes so twisted that it ends in the destruction of another woman's entire family? Williams's case shows motherhood as possession rather than responsibility, a role to be taken by force if necessary. In that worldview, a pregnant woman is not a person, but a container, and in the most extreme cases, like this one, her children are not people either, just obstacles to be removed in service of the killer's fantasy. The Evans case forces us to confront not just individual pathology, but a broader cultural narrative in which motherhood becomes so idealized that some women are willing to kill to claim its status. Sometimes the person holding the knife isn't a stranger, an acquaintance, or a fellow breeder from a message board. Sometimes she is someone the victim calls a friend. In Tuscaloosa County, Alabama, 17-year-old Carithia Curry is excited and anxious. It is January 1996. She is 9 months pregnant, on the cusp of adulthood and motherhood at the same time. She gets into a car with someone she trusts, 29-year-old Felicia Scott. To friends, Scott is an older woman with a lively personality who claims to be pregnant herself. She talks about due dates and baby names. She has told her boyfriend and family that she is expecting. She is not. Scott's background is dotted with instability. She has experienced financial hardship, turbulent relationships, and a pattern of lying to protect herself from consequences or to gain attention. By late 1995, she has convinced those around her that she is pregnant. As the day she has told everyone she will deliver approaches, the lie, as in so many of these cases, becomes an existential problem. Rather than admit she made it up, she looks for a pregnant girl who trusts her. Friends later describe how Scott meticulously maintained her pregnancy fiction, wearing maternity clothes, discussing symptoms, even complaining about medical issues related to her supposed condition. She visits Carifia frequently in the months before the murder, establishing herself as a supportive older friend to the teenage mother-to-be. The relationship has a mentorship quality that makes Carifia's family comfortable with their connection. Scott positions herself as someone who can offer guidance and support to a young first-time mother, creating the perfect cover for her predatory intentions. What no one realizes is that Scott is studying Carifia, not to help her, but to replace her. What happens after Carifia gets into Scott's car is reconstructed from forensic evidence and later testimony. Scott drives her to a remote area. At some point, she shoots the teenager in the head. Believing her dead, Scott cuts open Carifia's abdomen and removes the baby girl. She leaves the body hidden and drives away, later presenting the infant as her own biological child. Family members and friends initially accept her story. For weeks, she lives out the role she has written for herself. New mother, proud, and doting. The crime scene, discovered much later, suggests a calculated attack. Carifia is shot at close range with minimal signs of struggle, indicating she likely never suspected danger from her supposed friend. The cesarean is crude but effective, performed with enough care to keep the baby alive, but with no regard for Carifia's humanity. Most disturbing is how Scott appears to have planned for the aftermath, bringing supplies to clean up blood evidence and choosing a remote location where Carifia's body would not be quickly discovered. Carifia's disappearance is noticed, but her body is not found immediately. When it is discovered, badly decomposed, the autopsy reveals the grim truth. She was killed in late pregnancy and her fetus removed. Meanwhile, Scott's claimed pregnancy and sudden appearance with a newborn begin to draw scrutiny. Investigators compare timelines. They note the absence of hospital records for Scott's supposed delivery. DNA testing eventually proves that the baby Scott is raising belongs to Carifia. Under mounting evidence, Scott is arrested and charged with capital murder and kidnapping. The investigation is complicated by the passage of time and the decomposition of Carifia's remains. Detectives piece together a timeline using phone records, witness statements, and Scott's suddenly changing story about her own delivery. Key evidence comes from medical professionals who examine both Scott and the baby, confirming that Scott shows no signs of having recently given birth and that the infant matches the gestational age Carifia's baby would have been at the time of her disappearance. In court, prosecutors present a chilling narrative of betrayal. Carifia trusted Scott. She thought she was with a friend. Scott, the state argues, used that trust to lure her into a deadly situation and then carved her baby from her body. The defense touches on Scott's mental health and life stresses, but cannot undo the stark facts. A jury convicts her of capital murder. Instead of a death sentence, she receives life in prison without parole. The trial is marked by emotional testimony from Carifia's family, who described the double trauma of losing a daughter and then discovering that someone they knew, someone they had welcomed into their home, was responsible. Medical experts detail the wounds on Carifia's body, explaining that the gunshot was meant to incapacitate her quickly so Scott could perform the crude cesarean. Most disturbing to jurors is evidence suggesting that Scott had been planning the crime for weeks, gradually gaining Carifia's trust while simultaneously preparing to take her baby. Today, Scott remains incarcerated in Alabama. Carifia's daughter is raised by relatives, another child whose first breath coincided with her mother's last. The Scott case is often cited in law enforcement training materials as a warning about womb raiders who operate within a victim's social circle, not from the shadows. It raises a brutal truth. Sometimes the danger to a pregnant woman is not the stranger in the alley, but the person offering a ride. For investigators, the case highlights the particular danger posed by predators who use mentorship and friendship as weapons. Scott's age and apparent interest in helping Coryphia navigate pregnancy created a false sense of security that made the younger woman vulnerable to an attack she never saw coming. The betrayal of trust compounds the horror of the crime itself, representing not just a physical attack, but an exploitation of human connection for the most monstrous of purposes. Some killers stop at the mother. Others, like Jacqueline Williams, slaughter children too. One case in Illinois shows just how far that annihilating logic can go. East St. Louis, September 2006. Investigators responding to a missing person report for 23-year-old Jamela Tunstall find her body in a vacant lot. She is roughly 7 months pregnant. Her abdomen has been cut open. The fetus is gone. A few days later, officers searching an apartment in a nearby housing complex make another horrific discovery: the bodies of 3 small children, a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 7-year-old, stuffed into a washer and dryer. All 4 victims are from the same family. The person responsible is not a stranger. Her name is Tiffany Hall. She has known Jamela since childhood. Neighbors remember seeing them together, pregnant at the same time, trading gossip and baby clothes. Hall has told her on and off boyfriend and others that she is expecting his child. She is not. As with Pierce, Montgomery, Parker, Williams, and Scott, the lie grows teeth as the imagined due date approaches. Hall decides that if she cannot produce a baby, she will take one. Those who know Hall describe her as troubled but not obviously dangerous. She has a history of mental health issues and unstable relationships. She has been in and out of work, sometimes staying with friends or family. What no one realizes is that beneath her sometimes chaotic exterior is a woman spiraling toward violence. Like the other killers in these cases, she has created a pregnancy narrative she cannot sustain. Unlike some, however, she does not stop at killing the mother. Hall's relationship with Jamela adds another disturbing layer to the crime. The 2 women are not just acquaintances, but longtime friends. Hall has babysat Jamela's children. She has attended family gatherings. She has been trusted completely. According to her later confession, Hall lures Jamela to her apartment, beats her with a table leg until she is unconscious or dead, and then cuts into her abdomen with household scissors to remove the fetus, a baby boy. She leaves Jamela's mutilated body in a field. The following days are even worse. To eliminate witnesses, she drowns Jamela's 3 children, Demond, Ivan, and Janella Tunstall, in the bathtub and hides their bodies in laundry appliances. She keeps the stolen fetus at home, telling people the baby is hers, even planning a funeral when it dies. The chronology of events reconstructed by investigators is chilling. First, Hall kills Jamela and takes her fetus, which does not survive the crude extraction. She then contacts Jamela's mother, claiming that Jamela has asked her to babysit the children for a few days. With the mother missing and the grandmother unsuspecting, Hall has access to the 3 children. She drowns them one by one in her bathtub, an act of methodical elimination that prosecutors later argue shows not panic or psychosis, but calculated determination to erase all witnesses and claimants to the baby she has stolen. The investigation unfolds piece by piece. Jamela is reported missing. Her body is found. The autopsy shows the missing fetus. Simultaneously, concern grows about the whereabouts of her 3 children. When police question Hall, she initially lies, but under pressure, she leads them to the washer and dryer containing the children's bodies. It is one of the most haunting scenes officers in that department have ever encountered. Detectives describe finding the children stacked like cordwood in the appliances, an image that haunts the investigation team and the community. When confronted with the overwhelming evidence, Hall confesses to all 4 killings. Her statement reveals a woman who saw the murders as necessary steps in a larger plan, each death serving a purpose in maintaining her fiction of motherhood. The callousness with which she describes drowning children she knew well and had cared for becomes one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. In 2008, Hall pleads guilty to multiple counts of first-degree murder, intentional homicide of an unborn child, and concealment of a homicidal death. She avoids the death penalty, but is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In court, Jamella's mother delivers a victim impact statement that combines faith and fury. She speaks of forgiveness, saying, "I have to forgive her," but also of the incalculable loss of 4 lives, including a baby who never had the chance to be born. The courtroom falls silent as she describes how she lost not just a daughter, but an entire branch of her family tree in one calculated act of violence. Prosecutors describe the case as uniquely horrific, noting that Hall not only stole a baby, but systematically eliminated an entire family to cover her crime. The judge, in sentencing her, observes that it is difficult to imagine a more complete betrayal of trust than murdering the children she had been asked to protect. Hall's case reverberates beyond East St. Louis. It becomes a grim reference point in discussions of fetal abduction, particularly when the killer exterminates an entire branch of a family tree to erase witnesses and obstacles. It underlines the terrifying fact that in some minds, a baby is not a human being, but an object, a goal to be obtained, even if achieving it requires multiple homicides. For criminologists studying familicide, the case represents a unique hybrid, not a parent killing their own family, but an outsider systematically eliminating someone else's family to claim their child. It raises disturbing questions about how thoroughly some people can dehumanize others, seeing even children they know well as nothing more than inconvenient obstacles to be removed. As of 2025, Hall remains in prison in Illinois, her name forever linked to one of the most complete acts of family annihilation in American criminal history. The pattern is unmistakable now: fake pregnancies, mounting lies, and the decision to solve an internal crisis by attacking a pregnant woman. But the phenomenon is not limited to the US, nor to people with long histories of social media performance. It crosses borders and cultures.
The talk in this courtroom is about appointing a public defender who is qualified to handle a possible death penalty case for the woman accused of killing a pregnant woman 10 days ago.
In June 2008, in Kennewick, Washington, police are called to a gruesome scene involving a young woman named Araceli Camacho Gomez. She is found bound hand and foot with yarn, stabbed multiple times, her abdomen slashed open. Her unborn child is missing. Within hours, a woman appears at a nearby hospital claiming she has just given birth to a baby with no prenatal records. Her name is Phiengchai Sisuvan Sinhavong. Sinhavong is believed to have emigrated from Southeast Asia and has built a life in the Pacific Northwest marked by financial stress and relational instability. In the months before the killing, she tells her boyfriend and others that she is pregnant. As in so many previous cases, when her claimed due date arrives and there is no pregnancy, she turns outward. According to prosecutors, she targets Araceli, who is near term, and lures her into a car. The attack, as reconstructed in court, is brutal, but follows the now familiar pattern: binding, stabbing, crude cesarean, theft of the fetus. What makes Sinhavong's case somewhat unique is the cultural context. Her attorneys later argue that severe mental illness combined with cultural isolation and pressure contributed to her actions. Cultural expectations around motherhood and family, they suggest, intensified her desperation when confronted with her fictitious pregnancy. While this defense attempts to provide context, it does not diminish the methodical nature of the crime itself. Sinhavong researched cesarean procedures, prepared tools, and specifically targeted a woman in late pregnancy. At the hospital, doctors quickly realize that Sinhavong does not show physical signs of recent childbirth. DNA testing will later confirm that the baby she presents as her own is Araceli's child. Police link the two crime scenes and arrest her. In court, she is convicted of aggravated first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. The trial reveals a woman whose desperation reached lethal proportions. Sinhavong had been telling people for months that she was pregnant. She had created a nursery, bought baby clothes, and named her supposed child. When confronted with the inevitability of her lies exposure, she chose violence rather than truth. The prosecution emphasizes the predatory nature of the crime, how Sinavong lured Araceli with promises of free baby clothes and items for her nursery, exploiting the generosity and trust of a young mother-to-be. Sinavong's case underscores that this is not an American pathology alone. The combination of social pressure, economic hardship, and a desperate need for status or love can erupt into violence in any community. The victims, however, are always the same: pregnant women whose bodies become battlegrounds for other people's fantasies. What remains constant across cultural contexts is the fundamental dehumanization at the heart of these crimes, the reduction of a pregnant woman to a vessel containing something the killer wants, and the Aetsi's willingness to destroy that vessel to obtain its contents. Sinavong, like the other perpetrators in these cases, demonstrates how completely some individuals can separate a baby from its mother in their moral calculation, seeing the child as a possession to be claimed, rather than as one half of a human relationship. In 2022, the pattern takes a new twist in the rural borderlands of Arkansas and Missouri, where social media is not just a place to pretend you are pregnant, but a hunting ground for women who are. Ashley Bush is 33 years old and 31 weeks pregnant when she meets Laci on Facebook. Laci claims to be a recruiter offering work-from-home jobs. She also claims she can help Ashley with baby clothes and support. Ashley is struggling financially. The two women arrange to meet. Laci is actually Amber Waterman, a woman who has told her husband and others she is pregnant. She is not. She wants a baby. On October 31st, 2022, Ashley gets into Waterman's vehicle near Maysville, Arkansas, expecting a job interview and a ride home. She never makes it back. Later that day, first responders are called in Missouri for a non-breathing newborn. The woman at the center of the call says she has just given birth. She is Waterman. The baby does not survive. Meanwhile, Ashley's family reports her missing. Investigators trace messages, phone pings, and Facebook accounts. The digital trail points directly to Waterman. What makes the Waterman case particularly disturbing to investigators is its intersection with technology. Unlike earlier cases where killers might stake out prenatal clinics or rely on personal connections to find victims, Waterman uses social media as both hunting ground and cover story. She creates the fictional Laci persona specifically to lure pregnant women in financial need, a calculated exploitation of economic vulnerability during pregnancy. The digital breadcrumbs she leaves behind become crucial evidence, allowing investigators to reconstruct not just her actions on the day of the murder, but the weeks of planning that preceded it. Within days, Waterman's husband, Jamie, cracks. He tells detectives that Amber admitted to killing Ashley, that he helped her burn the body in a fire pit and move the remains to a more remote location. When police find Ashley's charred remains, they confirm what her family already fears. She was murdered, her unborn daughter, Valkyrie Grace, taken from her womb, and both mother and child killed. The crime scene evidence is particularly grim. Investigators find blood in Waterman's car and home, along with tools used in the crude cesarean. They discover Ashley's partially burned body, showing signs of both blunt force trauma and the makeshift surgery. Most disturbing is evidence suggesting that Waterman attempted to deliver the baby alive, succeeded in extracting her from Ashley's body, but was unable to keep her alive outside the womb. The failed delivery leads Waterman to report a stillbirth, triggering the medical response that ultimately brings the case to light. In 2024, Waterman pleads guilty in federal court to kidnapping resulting in death and causing the death of a child in utero. A federal judge sentences her to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. State prosecutors in Arkansas move forward with their own capital murder case. Ashley's relatives sit in court as they hear how Amber used the promise of a job and baby supplies to lure a pregnant woman into a trap. A U.S. attorney calls it a calculated, selfish plan to take a child that was never hers. During the sentencing, Ashley's family describes a loving mother of 3 who was excited about welcoming her 4th child. They speak of birthday celebrations that will never happen, of a daughter who will never know her mother, of brothers and sisters left to grow up with an empty chair at the table. The judge notes that the crime combined predatory calculation with extreme violence. Waterman not only killed Ashley and her baby, but attempted to destroy all evidence of their existence through fire. Waterman's crime shows how easily technology can turn into a weapon. The false identity, the crafted messages, the targeted outreach to an expectant mother in need. All of it is invisible until it is too late. For pregnant women participating in online communities, the case is a chilling reminder that danger can arrive in the guise of help. Law enforcement officials point to the Bush murder as an example of how social media creates new vulnerabilities for pregnant women who may be searching for support, resources, or flexible work options during pregnancy. The anonymity of online personas makes it harder to verify identities and intentions, creating opportunities for predators to target women who would be more cautious in face-to-face interactions. As of 2025, Waterman remains in federal prison. Her case a stark warning about the intersection of digital deception and physical violence in the modern era of fetal abduction crimes. Finally, not every killer who targets pregnant women does so to steal a child. Sometimes, the pregnancy itself becomes a point of violent conflict in a relationship, especially when the man involved has already proven capable of lethal violence. In London in 2024, 32-year-old Alana Odysseos is pregnant with her 3rd child. She is in a relationship with a man named Shane March, who is out on license after serving time for a previous killing. March has a documented history of violence, including assaults on pregnant partners. As Alana's pregnancy progresses, he becomes increasingly controlling, paranoid about paternity, and insistent that she have an abortion. She refuses. For her, the baby is a life. For him, it is a threat to his control, his narrative, and his fragile sense of dominance. The relationship follows a pattern familiar to domestic violence experts. March isolates Alana from friends and family. He monitors her movements and communications. He alternates between periods of apparent tenderness and explosive rage. What makes this situation particularly dangerous is that March's controlling behavior escalates as Alana's pregnancy advances, a time when she is physically vulnerable and increasingly dependent on the relationship for support. Court records later reveal a series of text messages in which March repeatedly demands that Alana terminate the pregnancy, accusing her of infidelity and threatening consequences if she refuses to comply. On the night of the attack, neighbors hear screams. Alana staggers out of her home in Walthamstow, bleeding heavily from multiple stab wounds. Before she collapses, she tells those who rush to help exactly who did this to her: Shane. Paramedics rush her to hospital, but she dies of her injuries. The fetus does not survive. CCTV footage later shows March wandering the streets afterward, calling family members to say he has just killed someone and needs to go back to jail. The forensic evidence paints a horrific picture. Alana is stabbed more than 20 times, with wounds concentrated in her abdomen, a pattern that investigators believe shows March's specific targeting of the pregnancy. Witnesses report hearing him shout about the baby during the attack, further establishing that the pregnancy itself was a central motivation for the violence. Unlike the other cases in this compilation, there is no attempt to preserve the fetus. March's goal appears to be elimination, not acquisition, the complete erasure of a pregnancy he refuses to accept. March is arrested and charged with murder. At trial in 2025, the court hears that this is not his first killing. Years earlier, he took another life and was deemed safe enough to release under supervision. Jurors see messages in which he threatens Alana, accuses her of infidelity, and obsesses over whether the baby is his. The prosecution argues that the pregnancy was a central factor in his decision to kill. It symbolized a loss of control he could not tolerate. The judge, in sentencing him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 42 years, calls him a very dangerous man and notes the state's failure to protect Alana. Outside court, Alana's family calls for Alana's Law, a system that would warn women about partners with histories of serious domestic violence and homicide. The trial reveals multiple missed opportunities to protect Alana. March had violated the conditions of his license several times in the months before the murder. He had made explicit threats against Alana that were reported to authorities. A domestic violence risk assessment had classified him as high risk, but this information was not effectively shared across agencies. For Alana's family, these systemic failures compound the tragedy of her death, a preventable murder that occurred while the perpetrator was supposedly under supervision. March's case highlights a different facet of the theme. Here, there is no desire to possess the baby, no fake pregnancy, no theft from the womb. Instead, the pregnant body becomes a battlefield in a war over control and identity. Killing Alana means killing the child and silencing a woman who dared to make her own choice about her pregnancy. Domestic violence experts testifying at the trial note that pregnancy often escalates abuse in already violent relationships. The pregnant body represents both vulnerability and autonomy, a woman making reproductive choices that her abuser cannot control. For men with extreme need for dominance, like March, this perceived loss of control can trigger lethal violence, specifically targeting the pregnancy. Statistics presented at trial show that homicide is a leading cause of death for pregnant women in many countries, with intimate partners the most common perpetrators. March becomes not just an individual killer, but a stark representation of a broader pattern of violence against pregnant women by the partners who should protect them. Together, these cases reveal a dark truth about human nature and about the societies in which these crimes occur. Pregnancy is supposed to be a protected state, a time when communities rally around women to keep them safe. Instead, in these stories, it becomes a vulnerability, a visible target that attracts predators. Some of those predators want the status, love, or control they think a baby will bring. Others want to erase evidence of infidelity or escape responsibility. Some are deeply traumatized, their minds warped by years of abuse. Others are coldly calculating, using empathy and trust as weapons. What connects them all is a fundamental dehumanization, the ability to see a pregnant woman not as a complete person with rights and dignity, but as either an obstacle to be removed or a vessel containing something of value to be taken. This pattern transcends geography, culture, and time period, suggesting something profoundly disturbing about how pregnant bodies can be perceived when stripped of their humanity. The question that lingers is uncomfortable. What do these crimes say about how we value pregnant women, about the systems that fail to protect them, and about the individuals who see a pregnant body not as a person, but as a means to an end? There is no single answer. Each case is a complex knot of personal history, societal pressure, and individual choice. Trauma explains some behavior, but it does not excuse it. Poverty and desperation provide context, but not justification. If you found this exploration into these shocking cases compelling, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Which of these killers do you think was the most disturbing? Share your thoughts in the comments below.